Don't Give Up Ukraine for our 10th sessions already. And that means that the war in Ukraine is already taking place for 10 weeks. And it doesn't seem that this will end soon. So the good news is that we have again this live YouTube live broadcast, and I'm proud to have two guests, Fred van Iersel and Yuriy Shchurko, and they will introduce themselves in a minute. Our topic of this discussion is Christianity and Pacifism, and it finds its reason in the discussion that started already shortly after the starting of the war, of the position Pope Francis took on the war in Ukraine, and the refusal, so to say, to condemn Russia and Putin's Russia as perpetrators in this war. And then, so we want to use this as an occasion to discuss some other issues about the war in Ukraine from a more theological perspective, and we will cover some things like the just war idea, the just war theory in a theological perspective, discuss about pacifism, and discuss about non-violence and whatever we consider interesting in this thing. So we start with a short introduction. So Yuriy, could you give a short introduction of yourself?
Okay, I will just say 4 short statements. First of all, I'm a priest of Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. I'm a biblical scholar. I'm a dean of the Faculty of Philosophy and Theology at the Ukrainian Catholic University. As a Byzantine tradition, belonging to Byzantine tradition, I am a married priest and a father of 4 children.
How old are your children, if I may ask?
The oldest is 19. He's second-year student of law at the UKU, and the youngest, he's 8 and second year at school. So, and another in the middle school, my girl, and another son, he's graduating high school this year, and we hope that he will enter the university in the fall semester.
And they're doing well?
He likes, he likes history. And 2 youngest, we don't know what they will do because they're still young.
That's a good thing, huh? Not to know yet what they will do.
Yeah. Like other children, they got acquainted with this new way of life. They are trying to play in bomb shelter when we go down, because we're living on the 9th and 10th floor in a big building. And when we go to the bomb shelter, the older children are trying to read something, younger trying to play with their friends. So they are not already terrified, at least they do not show this externally. And I asked them how they feel themselves during the first weeks of the war. They just said a little bit troubled, a little bit. They don't want to terrify their parents, what they feel.
Taking good care of their parents. Yes.
Yeah.
Fred, could you give a short introduction of yourself?
Yes, I'll try. I'm a retired professor at Tilburg University. I also live in the city of Tilburg. My theme was religion and ethics in the context of the armed forces. I've had a chair on this issue for about 27 years. I'm one of the founding fathers of the Dutch military ethics for the Dutch armed forces, which got a huge impulse after the fall of Srebrenica. I was one of the co-founders of the Office for Military Ethics that was established because of the educational issues in preparing Dutch soldiers for military peace operations. And I wrote two manuals about that. After I wrote these two manuals on theological issues, then I started to focus on the just war issues related to the Roman Catholic tradition. I'm a Roman Catholic myself, living in the Netherlands. And meanwhile, I'm retired at Tilburg University, but I'm still teaching Catholic social teaching at the International Institute of Canon Priest, which is a master education run by the Brothers of Charity at an international level. And there I teach social encyclicals from Pope Leo XIII until now. These involve, of course, also issues of war and peace, but also in economics and politics.
To create a bit of a level playing field, Fred, do you also have children?
No, I haven't. Unfortunately, life went another way with me.
Thank you, Fred, for this short introduction. And so my first question always is, Yuri, in these Don't Give Up Ukraine live streams, how is Lviv today? How is the mood today after 10 weeks of a war? And not only Lviv, of course, but in Ukraine. How would you, let's say, summarize that?
Currently, we already, I would say, come to some conclusions, so to say, about the reason of this war. Because of during the first week, all people in Lviv, like everywhere in Ukraine, were terrified, were troubled with one question: is it possible? Is it possible in our days? And now we come to conclusion that that is possible because after condemning fascism after World War II, we didn't condemn communism in the same way, and it spread these poison roots in Soviet Union through Russian regime, which in hidden way, but developed during the last 30 years after split between countries of former USSR. But slowly all this poison and damaged understanding of the world, of the mission of Russian nation was developed in thing we today already have in Wikipedia, Russism, which is Russian fascism. Everyone can read the small article, what is the root of this fascism, and it's explained very shortly, but it's very understandable article. So most people come to conclusion, yes, our generation has to deal with this, and we are ready to put to the end that roots of evil which destroys everything around. And that's not our destiny, maybe it's our vocation. So we are not only terrified, but we're trying to reflect on this. How is our role in history? It was difficult for us to convince Western world about the dangers which comes from Russia for the normal people. And we sometimes feel that people do not listen to us because of they were admired with Russian culture and they didn't see all threats. But after 2 months, I guess after meeting in Ramstein, after many high-level visitors from the West to Ukraine, after all this terrible, horrific and awful things which happened around Kiev, people in the Western world opened their eyes and understood what's going on in fact. And for us in Lviv, it's became not like a satisfaction. It's more like became a routine. What we just have to proceed with self-defense. We just have to proceed with self-defense. What I personally discovered for myself is that most people, whoever they are, clergy, academics, ordinary people, so to say, most of them come to maybe not easy conclusions, but that we have to deal with this issue, even it's something unacceptable, something awful for normal mind. But we have to deal with this, we have to stop this. And the only issue which is, troubling us and boring us every day, it's a price we have to pay. It's a huge price. Our moods in Lviv are, so to say, optimistic because we believe in our victory, which will be achieved with the help of the old civilized world. And we are happy about this big support we already have. And we obviously are moving to, I would say, just peace. We would like to achieve just peace. It was many hours to think for most of us about our personal attitude. Some of them, like me, looked through the spectacles of just war. Some of us were some kind of pacifists, but all of us come together with the teaching of the church that our aim is just peace. And even if someone is pacifist, it doesn't mean that people have to be, outside of the process. They have to be involved in quite different way, but they have to be involved. And for what we would like to achieve this just peace, to work on permanent just peacemaking, which will prevent in future such kind of war and disaster we experience today. So to sum up, we in some way looking optimistic on what we are doing. Right now, we are grateful for support. We feel very big pain with the losses we have every day, but we understand that what we do have eternal meaning, it has eternal meaning. We are looking in future and understand that world will not be the same within a couple months. And it's our vocation, to prevent this world from destroying, fighting, and standing for our life and for the life of next generation. It's not triumphalistic, approach. It's something realistic. People already are not terrified. They, I would say, just gathered, inside and sober, because of even psychology says you cannot afraid more than 2 weeks. I lose my fear on the 5th day of that aggression. Before this, all these 5 days, I don't want to explain how I felt, but it was terrible, and I hear most people had the same feeling. So after 5 days, someone after a week or at least 2 weeks, people went on another level and said, okay, but we have to deal with this. What do we have to do? What is my role? We left these 2 questions: why it happened and when it will finish. We just left it to the Lord, and we started to ask, as true Christians have to ask ourselves, and even non-believers, with a conscience, the same questions: what we have to do, who needs our support, who needs to be cared, who needs to be protected, and who we are in this situation, who is God for us, what is the role of the church, what is the role of the society. Only 2 questions, what and who, in different directions. And that's what we, today I went to, how to say in English, to cut my hair, and that woman, this lady, asked when we will have air alarm in view. We didn't have for a couple of days. She was joking. After I returned home, we already had. But it didn't last more than maybe half an hour. And before this, I looked in internet and found that Russian troops started very aggressive attack on Mariupol, on that factory where our soldiers are hidden underground, so-called Azovstal. And I used that time in bomb shelter just for praying for them, that God made them stronger to withstand, and that they survived. So, besides this, we have still refugees on our faculty. We have refugees in our faculty. So every day we are trying to visit them, giving them some spiritual care, but mostly other programs of our university, special social pedagogy. They take care about their, housing, feeding, all things they need. So these people remind us, even in Lviv, we just have 4 time bombing only, 4 times. The other parts of Ukraine sometimes completely destroyed, sometimes half destroyed, sometimes under permanent threat, like in Kyiv, or Odessa, which is never can be, prognosed, because even during the visit of Gutierrez, there was an attack. It's you cannot understand this, how, but they continue to lie. Even their religious leaders like Gundyayev, who is, I would say, a head of ideological department of that regime, and they saying we never across the borders, we never fight in any country. You know, it's like something surrealistic. You're reading. It's
maybe I may ask the same question here, but so you're basically this exploring some very different layers in this war, and in your answer you started with this, that you came after a couple of days, you met people in Lviv asking the question, well, what kind of war is this actually, so to say? What war, I mean? And I'm curious, Fred, if I ask you this same question, how do you see this war, so to say, in Ukraine? So Yuri refers to some personal, existential, but also, I would say, a very deep political appreciation of what this war is, referring to Russia after 1945, and even you're referring to as not that there is something evil, not even hidden, but even coming to the surface, so to say, in a very destructive way. So how do you see, Fred, this war in Ukraine? What's your
from my point of view, I think that it's an eye opener for me as a European living inside the EU. It's an eye opener that democracy, human rights, and cultural pluralism must be defended. I think that the EU, over the last 70 years, has developed in a quite good direction. It developed a lot of institutional guarantees for conflict prevention inside the area of the EU. It developed a European Court of Justice. It developed also the Council of Europe as a guarantee for human rights. These are all very important institutions, but we were focusing on prevention of conflict, not on defending it. And now we are woken up, and somebody, let's say the Ukrainian population, asked us, are you ready to defend the key values of our society, of course, in Ukraine, but these are basically the same key values as we have in the EU. This, in fact, in a cultural sense and also in a religious sense, I think this is our war too, because it is about our key values. And I think it's no longer enough that the EU focuses only on conflict prevention. It should also focus on, let's say, what to do if there is a war of aggression against you. One of the key issues in this war in Ukraine, as I see it, is that that the evil, the moral evil, the ethical evil, can be in the intention of an enemy that you don't want. We of course, in principle, nobody wants to be an enemy of Russia, but some key players in Russia have developed a very evil intention against the EU system and against Ukraine. So the moral evil can be in the intention of the opponent, and I think that's something we have to learn again in the EU. That yes, we can have enemies, and we do have enemies, and I think that some of us still are shocked, and in that sense, we are still in the first stage about which Yuri was speaking. His first week, his first 5 days. Many Europeans in the EU are still in these first 5 days. They are in shock that enmity really exists. And yes, there are still wars of aggression, and of course that's also very difficult for Christians to deal with. But of course, it's difficult for everybody. But of course, this is a challenge for Christians to deal with their former stance in the debate between pacifist and just war tradition and just priest tradition. I'm very happy that Yuri mentioned the just peace tradition, which has been developed also in the churches over the last 25 years mainly. It's very important. The key idea of that is that peace can only be sustainable if it's based on justice, and that is the key value that all public life must be directed to. So there can be no peace based only on security and only on defense, and that's why the just peace tradition transcends somehow the just war tradition. But my opinion was already, and still is, that the just war tradition has something good in it, also in this case in the Ukrainian war, because it deals with the possibility that there can be a need to defend your key institutions and your key values. And I don't care if the expression of just war will disappear. I don't care about that. But we need an ethics of conflict escalation. We need an ethics of defending our peace. We need an ethics of defending our justice. In my view, already the just war tradition was about that. Was about defending justice, because the just war is nothing without a concept of justice. But I think this Ukrainian war makes it very clear that anyone who wants a just and sustainable peace has to be ready to defend that. And well, I still hope that the support that is very general inside the EU, both on the population and on politicians towards Ukraine, that it can become even stronger for that. At the same time, I say that I still understand, let's say, that many Christians still opt for pacifism in some way or another. But I can accept that, because let's say I've known some people who even during the Second World War in the Netherlands were very active in the resistance against the Nazi regime, but without using weapons. So I know that pacifism can be very active also against aggression. And in that dimension, I would not reject all levels of pacifism. Pacifism can be a responsible option too in this domain. But as far as I see it, states like Ukraine and also the EU member states always have the obligation to defend the freedom of the citizens. Pacifism can be something that can be taken over by individual citizens, not by states. So that's why I see these two options up until today as complementary options, not as really opposing each other. And in practice, I think that also looking at the experience with pacifism in the Netherlands during the Second World War, I see that it can have a positive effect in the resistance in times of occupation. But there are times of occupation and there are times of armed defense. And I think it's very important that nowadays, at this very moment, we need to accept that armed defense of our key values and our key institutions is needed. And I think it's also ethically legitimate because, well, the Roman Catholic Church accepts international law as a framework for international conflict. International law implies that Article 51 of the United Nations chapter tells us that there is something like legitimate self-defense of states until the United Nations Security Council takes proper measures. That's what Article 51 tells us about. But in this time, we will see no action at all of the United Nations Security Council. So the Ukraine is fully entitled to defend itself and should be supported for this right, and even this obligation Ukraine as state has to defend its inhabitants.
Mm.
And that's why I strongly support also the Western support in terms of armament and providing advice and in intelligence. I think that's very important, and I fully support that because it's in conformity with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. And by the way, I think it's also important that the Roman Catholic Church has always accepted that, and that's why. But next to that, it has interpreted until recently that Article 51 of the United Nations Charter is also, in fact, let's say an interpretation of the just war, because there's only one type of just war, and that's a defensive war. It's not the wars of aggression can never be just wars, but wars of defense can be just wars. And that's why, let's say, at the start of the United Nations, the Vatican has accepted Article 51(2) on moral and ethical grounds, not just on legal grounds. And that's sometimes I would say that I hope that the Vatican can also remember the historical background of their consent to the Article 51 of the United Nations Charter.
Good, thank you very much, Fred, for your opinion about this. So let's think about a bit further on what both of you said. So, and let's take it back to the general, let's say, message in your words, as I hear, that this war in Ukraine now is in some sense, or in a substantial sense, outstanding, in a sense that it's not a war, if you can say so, a normal war, so to say, but a war related between Ukraine on the one hand and a perpetrator, a former, or not former, totalitarian country, a nuclear power, with a tradition of being since 1923, a totalitarian country, a nation, invading Ukraine. So, and I always had the idea from the moment I start coming to Ukraine, think about 15 years ago, that that just by existing and just by choosing, let's say, the way Ukrainians want to build on their future, they are a threat for Russia. Not in a military way, of course, but as a kind of alternative way, what deconstructs this totalitarian narrative. So this is maybe what make this war so outstanding, if this is the right word. So it's so much more at stake. I think, Fred, in your words, you're all referring to as values and European values and so on. But it's maybe even more. So it's like comparing a war with Nazi Germany, for instance. This is a kind of war what takes place now in Ukraine. And in that coming to terms with this war, it's like what Yuriy also said, it took us 5 days, and Fred said, yeah, well, we're still in these first weeks in thinking about what war is this actually. So we get military Dutch specialists on television as of very sensible, and they talk about in a sort of geopolitical way of this war, in power and field of influence and so on. But as long as we don't appreciate the challenge this war had for us in a more deeper sense, our answer will always fail. And that is, I think, an answer which not only for me or for you we're looking for, but for instance also what the Catholic Church is looking for, what the Pope is looking for. And to give my first question to you, Yuriy, you as I know, and you know, and we all know, you are not very happy, to put it mildly, with the position Pope Francis chose on this war. Could you explain why this is so?
When we see so-called impartiality, that Pope Francis doesn't want to raise any position, or more exactly to say, he doesn't want to name the aggressor. You know, when we discovered this position, it was not surprising. It was something we cannot accept because of during this period, I wrote maybe 30 small articles, like appeals, and in 3 of them, I just mentioned it, not personally Pope, but Vatican officials about their mistaken approach, because it's not evangelical, it's not biblical, it's very political and not honest. Because of, you know, when we, as a biblical scholar, you know, I wrote a little bit about violence in the Bible, how we deal with this. I looked in, you know, in all documents of Catholic Church. I didn't find this impartiality, you know, that they should be, you know, playing between 2 sides. I didn't find this position official. It's Ostpolitik, so-called, which comes from the admiring of Russian culture, but which do not take on account suppression, totalitarianism, which exists in Russia and existed all the time. So even today, we had a small article about Pope's interview with an Italian or Spanish magazine when he told that he is going to Russia to talk with Putin because he doesn't understand what's going on. So what I have to say on this issue? Unfortunately, Pope comes from a quite different environment, and he doesn't understand what's going on in Europe, and especially in relationship between Russia and Ukraine. He doesn't understand all this, you know, peculiarities of European politics, and he is influenced by people who, you know, maintain it that Ostpolitik, starting from Casaroli and all these guys year by years. And this is why they left, I would say, evangelical New Testament approach about darkness and light, truth and lie, and so on. And they are playing a diplomacy which doesn't work, which doesn't recognize victims. So they failed in couple initiatives. They failed with couple initiatives which were a big, you know, mistake. For example, wearing the cross. They asked it to do this to women who left Ukraine and Russia 20 years ago, who doesn't understand what's going on in their country they left. He also dedicated Ukraine and Russia to the Blessed Virgin Mary, victim and aggressor, on the same level, without naming who is aggressor. You know, these things are unacceptable for us. These things are unacceptable for every normal and sober mind. It's something, surrealistic. So what we decided, as C.S. Lewis said, we shouldn't never account on a position of man if we don't want to be disappointed. Our strength and our, I would say, light is Jesus Christ, his teaching. Pope is only a person who, when starts to talk about today's issues, comes to very inappropriate, I would say, conclusions. And it would be better if he could, just pray. And I would say even do not talk on political issues, because of he doesn't understand what's going on. I don't know why. He accepts this. In the last interview, he said, "I am only a priest. What can I do?" But he still is under Russian propaganda, under influence of Russian propaganda. When he had a meeting with Kirill Gundyaev, one of the biggest ideologists of that war, who is officially named as patriarch, but for me as a Christian, it's just, political criminal. 20 minutes of 40 minutes of their meeting, Kirill Gundyaev convinced Pope why they had to start this war. It's unacceptable because of and United Nations and all teaching of the church, at least Catholic Church, during the last 20th century, says that only self-defense is, a reason to be in war. Only self-defense, nothing more. I am a biblical scholar. I'm not, social ethic, but I had to take this. Fred knows this book, the new dictionary of Catholic social thought, to read through all this article relation to, just war, peacemaking, pacifism, and this another one, dictionary of scripture and ethics, which I like very much.
I know it.
Dictionary of scripture and ethics, with this new just peacemaking theory. All these articles, I had read through many times because I just want to understand position of Pope, and I didn't found the reason to behave in the way he behaved.
Maybe Fred can shed some light on this question of you. I know you have some also your own ideas, or maybe a kind of an explanation why Pope Francis chose to go this way, which means that you agree with them, by the way, Fred. But maybe you can shed some light on this puzzle which Yuriy convinces or gives us.
Maybe, but first I would like to say that I myself am just war theorist, but I will now try to explain the thought of Pope Francis as far as I can understand it. I've read a lot of the materials Pope Francis wrote when he was still pastorally active in Argentina, also as a cardinal. And as I understand it, his idea about the functioning of armed forces, the military, is purely negative based on his experience of the so-called dirty war in Argentina. He has, in his youth and also as a working father in the church, he has only experienced the negative side of the armed forces in Argentina, and his religious order, the Jesuits, have meanwhile developed on a world scale. They developed into a type of Christian pacifism. And now, so they were somehow feeding the Pope in his dislike of all military activities. And I was in Rome in 2016 when there was 30 years of celebration of 30 years of military ordinarians, let's say military bishops inside the Roman Catholic Church. And there the Pope held a general audience, let's say, speaking also to Catholic military. And he expressed that he wanted, let's say, the Catholic military to build indeed justice, to build peace, to build freedom, and also to stand in between rival parties. So he wants Catholic soldiers to build bridges as much as they can. And I think I can understand that from his historical autobiographical background, but I think that he has at that statement the Pope was doing short towards what the Second Vatican Council said in the key document Gaudium et Spes, which is about the role of the church in the world, in number 79. There, the church reaffirms the right to self-defense of the church, which is completely in line with St. Paul's letter to the Romans. It's also in line with the thinking of the church fathers Ambrose and Augustine, who also accepted just war concepts. Of course, Christianity has not invented the just war tradition; it has inherited and integrated it into its thinking. But on the other hand, one must say that already in the Bible, certainly in the book of Exodus, chapter 17, there is the key text of just war as a defensive war. When the Hebrews were getting out of Egypt, and then they were attacked by the troops of Amalek, and then they started to defend themselves. That's the key text, not in a conceptual way, but in a narrative way. That's the key text in the Old Testament that expresses the right to self-defense. And that should be expressed, I think, more in the whole of the church teaching now. I can understand that the Pope doesn't want to emphasize the need for the use of force, but I can understand that, because I support him when he says that he doesn't want this war to become a religious war from his side. So he wants this war to be a secular war, and so it is. So in fact, he doesn't agree with the interpretation of Putin and the Patriarch Kirill, who in fact make this war into a religious war. But and I can understand that the Pope doesn't want any escalation into a further escalating religious war. But he still, and I can also understand that the Pope says that yes, activism on a non-violent basis can be a very good thing. It can be helpful in conflict prevention. It can be helpful also in reconciliation after conflict. And I completely agree with these two elements of non-violence in terms of conflict prevention and in terms of reconciliation, which are also key values inside Christianity. I can understand that the Pope wants to emphasize that, but meanwhile, he has also, in my opinion, he should also understand that yes, there is a right to self-defense. And this has a basis in the Old Testament too. It is and also I think also in the New Testament, but in a different way. Let's say I think that let's say the Pope needs to reassess his one-dimensional preference for non-violence, as he has expressed that also in official declaration since 2017. Each year, the Pope publishes a so-called the Declaration for World Peace Day, which is the first day of January in the Roman Catholic scheme. And from 2017 on, the Pope expresses the need for non-violence. But this is too one-dimensional. He must understand the role of evil in world history. So I would strongly advise the Pope to reread Saint Augustine about how sin, how moral evil is really active in world history, and how states do have the duty to work for the containment of evil. That's exactly what I see doing Ukraine against Russia. It's containing evil, and that's a classical task of the power of the sword, as Saint Paul in the letter to the Romans would express that. And that's also let's say the key interpretation of just war by Saint Augustine, who comments on the just war in 7 paragraphs. And I agree that with the Pope that Saint Augustine didn't have a comprehensive theory of just war, but Augustine used the concept of just war as a frame to build up the legitimacy of the state in its self-defense and in its attempt to defend citizens. And so it's I think that well, I don't agree with the interpretation of the Pope in his footnote 242 in this encyclical Fratelli Tutti. He puts aside the just war interpretation by Saint Augustine, and I think he's making a mistake in the interpretation of Saint Augustine. I would like to discuss that with him, if I could, if I was allowed to do that.
May I add something and ask you, both of you? So this is a bit about just war and choosing your sides based on the just war theory and putting it back in the theological and the biblical tradition. So, but and I'm also listening to Yuriy in that. Isn't this not leaving something out, so to say? Because I can imagine that you choose sides, what Yuriy explicitly says. So this is not a time for impartiality, but that you choose sides with those who suffer from the war. And then not suffer in a kind of general sense, but suffer as those who have to bear the burden of the war, who live in Bucha, who live in Mariupol, who live in Lviv today, all those people. And that just this showing yourself as a shepherd of Christians, so to say. Doesn't that mean also that you solidarize with those who share who bear the burden of this war, who suffer from this war? And that's basically what I would expect from a Pope, from Pope Francis. Show that you not care in general for everybody who has to bear the burden of this war, but those who live in Bucha and so on, and take in that sense of political and a solidarity side. Is that not something different from just thinking about just war theory?
You know, I'm always trying to look on someone's from the New Testament teaching. When I first time read Richard Hayes' The Moral Vision of the New Testament, Richard Hayes, who is, he is a very pacifistic. He's very pacifistic. But was thinking about this, but it was a peaceful time. After that, I have read Paul Copan and Matthew Flanagan book, Did God Really Command Genocide? Coming to the terms with the justice of God. In my humble but accurate opinion, I would say, it's maybe the best book about violence and all this stuff in one volume. Did God really command genocide? Because of its looks on the situation we live in right now, but it was written a couple of years ago, with I would say, naive approach, with a realistic approach. I understand the aim of Pope, but you know, Fred mentioned it about Romans 13. We have Acts 23, where Paul was given troops to protect them, and other, you know, especially when Jesus using his militaristic language in his speeches, when John the Baptist doesn't send soldiers away, when Jesus says about the centurions and his face, you know, is bigger than he saw in Israel, all this stuff. When you look all this together and look on suffered people, you know, there's always question. We have to choose. Be beyond our own approaches, desires. We have to choose to look at this awful and tragic reality with the courage to say who started the war, why he started. But what I discover right now, for example, Pope says, maybe Putin started war because of NATO was too close at his borders. You know this, his statement, it's in an interview. He's trying, you know, he's trying to understand Putin. But what I wrote on the second or third day, that it was not my statement, it was, I quoted a Russian Orthodox priest, Alexander Meny, who was killed in 1990, that evil is not logical. We just have to be courage to say that evil is evil. What is the problem with a naive pacifistic approach of Pope Francis and others? That they do not want to deal with a realistic world. Let me be more clear. You remember what happened with France after First World War. 1.3 million people were died, and France were, you know, reflected on this issue, and they become very pacifistic. The same we have politics with Chamberlain in Great Britain. When Hitler saw position of French, even they have more strong an army, they occupied France in 2 weeks, as they thought that they will do the same with Great Britain because of you know, position of Chamberlain. It's provoked him to attack. If not a period that after Chamberlain, Churchill, and had the courage to withstand with this, you know, we would know, we don't know what would happen in Europe. So, you know, when we, Fred already mentioned this today, but I would like to repeat, when we look at such kind of issues like this war in Ukraine, we have to always separate position of state and position of person. When I'm insulted, I have an obligation to forgive as a Christian. But country should protect its citizens. And when Pope is a person in charge and responsible, I think he has to be so courageous that to refuse from his personal approaches, which was very well explained. The roots of this his behavior was explained by Fred. But he has to understand the obligation of state, self-defense. Pius XII, Pope Pius, he refused about any other reason of just war except of national defense. Second Vatican, in already mentioned Veritatis Gaudium, Gaudium et Spes, excuse me.
Yeah.
Only added what? That pacifistic way of non-violence resistance is also acceptable. People has two different, has a right to behave in two different positions, except in just war or pacifism. Before Second Vatican, it was just you was obligated, to maintain just war theory because of country maintain it. So 9 years after Pius XII, we received, possibility to use this non-violence approach. But as already was mentioned today a couple of times, it doesn't decline it, a possibility to self-defense. And when it comes to the position of state, we can measure by our own personal approach and reacting like on insult. It's not insult, it's not insult. Person and office have different obligation. My personal, I will just mention you one thing. In fact, I have not 4 children, but 5. My oldest daughter was killed in accident when she was 6 years, 7 months. It happened 2008. She was killed by a drunk woman. She was killed by a drunk woman who was driving without license on someone's car. My wife and 3 of my kids were returning from the church. She instead put press brake, she pressed accelerator, she entered pavement and killed my daughter. What I have done, I forgave her. And I asked a judge, do not put her in prison, because of, in my opinion, our Ukrainian prisons are not as a place where people can be changed. She will, I suspected, she would become more criminal after prison than before. And I asked it, because of that lady had her own daughter without husband, that she lived and gave good education, with a kind attitude to his girl, that she didn't become like his mom. But I forgave. It's my personal approach, I had to forgive, and I forgave. And as well as my wife, we left it. We left it 14 years ago. And we do not feel any, I would say, evil thoughts against this woman. But if I would ask today, should I forgive Russians' killing of innocent people in Ukraine? I said, no, because it's not goes about my personal, insult, my personal pain, my personal experience. it goes about the obligation of state to protect innocence. And this thing, I guess, Pope has to take on account. This is what important. You know, I come to understanding just war theory very late, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I was influenced very much by Richard Hayes, Yoder, and other guys, you know, who were pacifistic. Fred knows this, all this, you know, the names and all the scholars. They are convincing, and they are good persons and good scholars. They have some good ideas, and I agree with them. But on personal level, which Catholic Church teaches right now that we have two possibilities. We can defend ourselves with a gun, and we can choose non-violent way of resistance. And when Pope just trying to, I would say, insist on one way, I said he's a little bit, maybe not intentionally, but unintentionally hides another possibility and doesn't want to reflect on what we have to deal with innocent victims today. Should we protect terrorists? Should we forgive terrorists? Should we forgive, you know, all these soldiers who are rapists of kids, and they killed also innocent old people and all this stuff. I don't want, you know, to disturb with all this information we have here, but believe me, you know, when I look at this, I always distinguish between my personal approach and what approach has to be done by the state, by the officials. This is, I guess, Christian approach, and this is what I read through the church documents and through different positions, you know. I also, finally to say, understand just peacemaking theory, which have to be developed to prevent something I would like to work on in future. Just peacemaking theory, it's wonderful, it's biblical, it's a Christian approach. But when bad thing happens, what we have to do? When just peacemaking theory failed, you know, and someone across this, we have in the Bible imprecatory psalms, you know, with the curses. Why? Because evil is real. When Yuriy says in his one of his books, Justice and the Evil of God, Western generation of people who didn't acquainted with you know, all this tragedy of Second World War, all it doesn't understand the awfulness of evil. But evil exists. This is why we have this imprecatory psalms that means that we have a right to desire judgment on evil. And that's normal. That's Christian approach. May I have these psalms.
Yeah. And just to finish it up, this last thing you were addressing, and I think a very important area we are entering. So just peace, but also dealing with the real evil, what is committed in Ukraine today, and what it requires from thinking about peace. So without coming to an answer to that, but that must be too early for me. But Fred, if you make some comments on that, how do you see this dealing with the evil committed? So, and thinking about a just peace regarding to this war. So in all openness, so.
But when I heard Yuriy speaking just the last 5 minutes, I thought now I hear a Ukrainian Reinhold Niebuhr he is expressing a view that an individual can be a pacifist, but states can never be pacifist. They have to defend themselves and also their citizens against evil. I think I learned from Niebuhr and also from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, that evil really existed and that someone has to take up responsibility to combat evil. One of the key issues in European culture inside the EU, I mean, is that many people think that evil is some old-fashioned idea that anything goes, that our freedom has replaced somehow the idea of evil. I think we should go much deeper into the issue. How can we identify evil? And I think we should go back to our basic sources like the Bible, like Aristotle, Plato, etc. How did they identify evil? Because let's say I think that in the Netherlands I observe many debates about Ukraine in which the issue of that evil is identifiable actually is neglected. People don't want to accept that evil is something real in world history and that something has to be done. I admire very much Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who also during the Second World War, most of the time he was a pacifist, but his concept, his approach was that when he looked at the totalitarian state of Nazism, he said someone has to take up the responsibility to combat this evil, and he joined the armed resistance of von Stauffenberg. And he insisted on the fact that he didn't leave his pacifism. He said, I'm fighting an illegitimate regime, a dictator. And so he identified evil in spite of, let's say, his being a pacifist, and then he took up his own responsibility by joining the resistance, and that's I think is something that I would like to invite many more Europeans to think over. At May 15. There will be the sanctification of a Dutch saint, Titus Brandsma, who even during the interbellum already in the 30s, he said, "Watch out, this Hitler is coming. I identify evil." So I hope that also for the Vatican and also for the Pope, this saint will be an inspiration to ask himself again: how can we identify evil, and how can people defend themselves against the ever-growing power of evil if we do nothing? So we have to rethink that completely, I think, in Christianity. That would be my strong plea. Certainly, but that will be my last remark for now, because 2023, it will be 60 years ago that there was a famous encyclical about peace, Pacem in Terris, peace on earth, by Pope John XXIII. I think this next year, we need a new encyclical on peace, where these issues that we are discussing today are addressed, and we really need that. But we don't need an eternal repetition of the need for non-violence. We need tools to identify evil. We need tools to give us a proper interpretation of evil. We need tools to judge whether or not and how we are allowed to defend ourselves against evil. That's what these next upcoming years will be about, I think, in Christianity, and should be about in Christianity. Mm-hmm. So I would like to ask the Pope, please write an encyclical next year about these issues.
Thank you. For you, the last word, Yuriy, but considering about what Fred said. So in the beginning, you said already, well, we began to recognize what war this actually is. And if I listen back for an hour, this is a war, not a war, what I said, in a normal armed conflict, so to say, but this is a war where this evil is identifiable. And dealing with this evil and preventing this evil in the future should be a part of ending this war, so to say. How do you see that? So,
ending of this war can be only military, I guess. Unfortunately, because of I don't see any progress in negotiation when one side doesn't accept their mistakes and when propaganda works. But since we already mentioned in today Gaudium and Spes, in the articles after 80, as I remember, there is articles about international cooperation.
Yeah.
I guess international cooperation between countries today to prevent such kind of war as we have today is a big obligation of authorities because of just peacemaking theory proposed that we have to work on prevention of something, not just, trying to resolve the problem. We have to work on prevention of problem. And that's what Fred mentioned already. We need a new encyclica on that kind of issue to name what evil is and trying to avoid the spreading of evil and growing of evil by common efforts, I guess, because we have one planet, it's our common home, and normal international cooperation, I guess, on a ground of common values, we call this human, as a Christian, we call this biblical, can give us a good instrument to work on a permanent and just peace in future. So we have to cooperate, we have to deal with difficult issues, we have to meet, discuss, and move forward. We shouldn't keep silence or avoid problem, because as N.T. Wright says in Justice and the Evil of God, when we are trying to avoid evil, sometimes it will slap us with all its ugliness in the face, and we'll discover that it exists. So as a church, we have to raise a voice and trying to gather people on maybe not very popular and not very pleasant, but some kind of discussions which will prevent from the next disasters and tragedies.
Thank you very much. I think the both of you have already made, I think, a significant contribution to this new encyclica. So I hope a lot of people will listen to you and take your wise advice into account. I want to thank you very much for being here, Yuriy Shchurko and Fred van Iersel in Don't Give Up Ukraine. And we will definitely meet again somewhere, somewhen, somehow.
I hope so.
Thank you very much.